The former cemetery of Bohnice patients, also known as the Cemetery of Fools, is located just 10-minute walk from the asylum, through picturesque fields and allotments. This cemetery is one of the scariest places in Prague, Czech Republic, and according to some articles, even in Europe. That's a high expectation to live up to, but let's come in. After you open the gate, you find yourself in a place with almost no sunlight, completely covered with the crowns of trees. It's a bit colder here than on the outside, and you can feel the strange smell, the smell of the ivy plant. I always thought that ivy doesn't have any scent, but there's so much of it here that it covers the ground, the trees, and even the air. The smell of ivy is woody, sweet, and intoxicating. Looking at how this persistent plant wrapped the trees and spread all over the ground, you might notice another strange thing. Many heaps, everywhere you look, are covered with ivy. These are the graves. This cemetery was opened in 1906 and it was used to bury the patients of Bohnice Asylum, the staff, the children that were born on the premises, but also the murderers. The cemetery is 4,200 meters square large, and it is estimated that over 4,000 people had been buried here between 1906 and 1951. In 1963, the ownership of the cemetery had changed and it slowly became neglected. The Cemetery of Fools became this place where a lot of strange characters would meet. Satanists, Freemasons, spirit hunters, and sometimes regular thieves. You've probably noticed that there are no tombstones here. That's because all of them have been stolen. All except one. The tombstone of Maria Tumova. She was a 29-year-old maid that died from a strange disease, shrinking of the brain. Since everything else was stolen from the cemetery, the fact that the tombstone of Maria Tumova is still standing there is pretty curious. That's perhaps why a lot of people called her the guardian of the cemetery, and people who come here often greet her, talk with her, and leave her flowers and candles. Another thing that is still standing on the cemetery, but only partially, is this chapel. Look at the trees on the sides. They remind me of hands reaching to the sky as if in a prayer. This chapel used to be used for burial services, but then was set on fire. In the back you can find the cellar and the place where they used to store lime powder. Lime was used for covering the bodies that were not buried in a coffin to reduce the smell of rotting. It was also used in mass graves and for the graves of those who committed suicide. The last scene of the movie Amadeus, made by an Oscar-winning director Milos Forman, features the process of covering the body of Mozart with lime. Mozart, of course, was not buried on this cemetery, but some other very famous person might have been. His name was Gavrilo Princip. He was a Serbian nationalist that assassinated Franz Ferdinand d'Este and his pregnant wife in Sarajevo and essentially started the First World War. Princip was missing just 27 days for his 20th birthday and he could not receive death penalty. Instead, he was locked up in Terezin's small fortress where he was dying slowly from bone tuberculosis. In the end, his body was weighing just 40 kilograms. And his mind? Well, a lot of people say that he went crazy in his prison cell. He was buried in Terezin's cemetery and later transported to Sarajevo. But some people say that just 3 days after his death, there was a military procession that transported some body from Terezin here to this cemetery. So he might have been buried here in the end. If you walk to the back of the cemetery, you will find smaller heaps covered with ivy. These are the graves of children of Bohnice. The first ever person to be buried here was 11-year-old boy, František Janovský, who was left by his family in the asylum. Some of these children were the outcome of unethical and illegal relationships between doctors and patients of the Bohnice asylum. All the way in the back you can find the obelisk dedicated to the soldiers and the victims of the First World War that were treated in Bohnice and later died there. The memorial plaque that used to say they give their bodies to this tomb but their lives to their country was also stolen. The southwestern part of the cemetery is where rapists, murderers, and arsonists were buried. It's completely covered by vegetation, and to be fair, I wouldn't go there anyway. Perhaps it's because of them this cemetery has been called the place with the highest paranormal activity and the worst energy in the Czech Republic. In 1996, Prague was visited by Margaret Thatcher, and the people who own gardens nearby the cemetery could swear that one day limousines parked next to the cemetery gate and the Iron Lady herself stepped out from the car. She was apparently looking for the grave of some of her husband's ancestors, and she had to ask for help from the person who knows the cemetery like the palm of his hand. He did it for her for a humble reward, a box of bottles of rum. Margaret Thatcher took the remains with her to Great Britain, and we can only guess who this person was. Nowadays, this cemetery is taken care of by Jiří Vítek, who fell in love with this place and cleaned it of 35 tons of trash. He's trying to preserve the unique atmosphere of the Prague Cemetery of Fools. Sometimes also tours of the spirit hunters come here to visit. Well, that's it guys for our today's video. We hope you liked it. If you are not spooked out enough, come visit this place at night, or don't. I'm not planning to for sure, but I will see you in our next video next week. Bye!